Hi, boys and girls. Today I'm going to start reading to you C.S. Lewis, The Magician's Nephew. It's actually the first in the Chronicle of Narnia's series. C.S. Lewis is an interesting guy. He was a professor in England. Oxford is one of the places that he taught at. And he did not believe in Jesus. He did not believe that the Bible was true. And so he set forth to research it and prove that it was all a bunch of stories and made up. In the process of doing that, he converted himself. And what I mean by that is in trying to prove that Jesus and God were not real, he proved to himself that they were real. And just lots of wisdom in his writing and lots of allegories that we'll talk about in the book. So this is by C.S. Lewis, and let me read the back to you. The secret passage to the house next door leads to a fascinating adventure. Narnia, where the woods are thick and cool, where talking beasts are called to life. A new world where the adventure begins. Diggory and Polly meet and become friends one cold, wet summer in London. Their lives burst into adventure when Diggory's Uncle Andrew, who thinks he is a magician, sends him hurtling to somewhere else. They find their way to Narnia, newborn from the lion's song, and encounter the evil sorceress Jadis before they finally return home. There are 7 books in all, and we're going to start with the first one. Chapter 1. The Wrong Door. This is a story about something that happened long ago when your grandfather was a child. It is a very important story because it shows how all the comings and goings between our own world and the land of Narnia first began. In those days, Mr. Sherlock Holmes was still living in Baker Street, and the Bastables were looking for treasure in the Lewisham Road. In those days, if you were a boy, you had to wear a stiff Eton collar every day, and schools were usually nastier than they are now. But meals were nicer. And as for sweets, I won't tell you how cheap and good they were, because it would only make your mouth water in vain. And in those days there lived in London a girl called Polly Plummer. She lived in one of a long row of houses which were all joined together. One morning she was out in the back garden when a boy scrambled up from the garden next door and put his face over the wall. Polly was very surprised because up till now there had never been any children in that house, but only Mr. Ketterling and Miss Ketterly, a brother and sister, old bachelor and old maid living together. So she looked up, full of curiosity. The face of the strange boy was very grubby. It could hardly have been grubbier if he had first rubbed his hands on the earth, and then had a good cry, and then dried his face with his hands. As a matter of fact, this was very nearly what he had been doing. "Hello," said Polly. "Hello," said the boy. "What's your name?" "Polly," said Polly. "What's yours?" "Diggory," said the boy. "I say, what a funny name," said Polly. "It isn't half so funny as Polly," said Diggory. "Yes, it is," said Polly. "No, it isn't," said Diggory. "At any rate, I do wash my face," said Polly, "which is what you need to do, especially after—" and then she stopped. She had been going to say, "after you've been blubbering," which is another way of saying crying, but she thought it wouldn't be polite. "All right, I have then," said Diggory in a much louder voice, like a boy who was so miserable that he didn't care who knew that he'd been crying. "And so would you, if you'd lived all your life in the country and had a pony and a river at the bottom of the garden, and then been brought to live in a beastly hole like this." "London isn't a hole," said Polly indignantly. But the boy was too wound up to take any notice of her, and he went on, "And if your father was away in India, and you had to come and live with an aunt and an uncle who's mad—" Who would like that? And if the reason was that they were looking after your mother, and if your mother was ill and was going to die, then his face went the wrong sort of the wrong sort of shape, as it does if you're trying to keep back your tears. I don't know. I'm sorry, said Polly humbly. And then, because she hardly knew what to say, and also to turn Diggory's mind to cheerful subjects, she asked, Is Mr. Ketterly really mad? Well, either he's mad, said Diggory, or there's some other mystery. He has a study on the top floor, and Aunt Liddy says I must never go up there. Well, that looks fishy to begin with. And then there's another thing. Whenever he tries to say anything to me at meal times, he never even tries to talk to her. She always shuts him up. She says, Don't worry the boy, Andrew, or I'm sure Diggory doesn't want to hear about that, or else, Now, Diggory, wouldn't you like to go out and play in the garden? What sorts of things does he try to say? I don't know. He never gets far enough. But there's more than that. One night, it was last night in fact, as I was going past the foot of the attic stairs on my way to bed, and I don't much care for going past them either, I'm sure I heard a yell. Perhaps he keeps a mad wife shut up there. Yes, I've thought of that. Or perhaps he's a coiner. Or he might have been a pirate, like the man at the beginning of Treasure Island, and he'd be always hiding from his old shipmates. How exciting, said Polly. I never knew your house was so interesting. You may think it is interesting, said Diggory, but you wouldn't like it if you had to sleep there. How would you like to lie awake, listening for Uncle Andrew's step to come creeping along the passage to your room? And he has such awful eyes. That was how Polly and Diggory got to know one another. And as it was just the beginning of the summer holidays, and neither of them was going to the sea that year, they met nearly every day. Their adventures began chiefly because it was one of the wettest and coldest summers there had been for years. That drove them to do indoor things. You might say, indoor exploration. It is wonderful how much exploring you can do with a stump of candle in a big house, or in a row of houses. Polly had discovered long ago that if you opened a certain little door in the box attic room of her house, you would find the cistern in a dark place behind it, which you could get into by a little careful planning. The dark place was like a long tunnel with a brick wall on one side and sloping roof on the other. In the roof, there were little chunks of light between the slates. There was no floor in this tunnel. You had to step from rafter to rafter, and between them was only plaster. If you stepped on this, you would find yourself falling through the ceiling of the room below. Now let's stop and picture this for a minute. So in her attic, picture a 2 or 3 or maybe even a 4-story house. Remember, we're back in the past in London right now. That's where our heads are. If we're listening to the story, if we're into the story. And in her attic, there's a door. And it's going to lead somewhere. Now, if you've ever looked in the attic in your own house, there will be wood, kind of like this, if that makes sense. But in between, typically for us today, there's insulation. But in her attic, there was only plaster. And if she would have stepped on the plaster, it wouldn't have held her weight. And she would have fallen down to whatever was below the tunnel. Polly had used the bit of tunnel just beside the cistern as a smuggler's cave. She had brought up bits of old packing cases and the seats of broken kitchen chairs and things of that sort, and spread them across from rafter to rafter so as to make a bit of floor. Here she kept a cash box containing various treasures, and a story she was writing, and usually a few apples. She had often drunk a quiet bottle of ginger beer in there, the old bottles making it look more like a smuggler's cave. Ginger beer would be like something like root beer to us now. Diggory quite liked the cave. She wouldn't let him see the story, but he was more interested in exploring. "Look here," he said. "How long does this tunnel go on for? I mean, does it stop where your house ends?" "No," said Polly. "The walls don't go out to the roof. It goes on. I don't know how far." "Then we can get the length of the whole row of houses?" "So we could. And oh, I say." "What?" "We could get into the other houses." "Yes, and get taken for burglars. No, thank you." "Don't be so jolly clever," said Polly. "I was thinking of the house beyond yours." "What about it?" "Why, it's the empty one. Daddy says it's always been empty ever since we came here." "I suppose we ought to have a look at it then," said Diggory. He was a good deal more excited than you'd have thought from the way he spoke. For, of course, he was thinking, just as you would have been, and you might be, of all the reasons why the house might have been empty for so long. So was Polly. Neither of them said the word haunted, and both felt like once the thing had been suggested, it would be feeble not to do it. "Shall we go and try it now?" said Diggory. "All right," said Polly. "Don't if you'd rather not," said Diggory. "I'm game if you are," said she. "How are we to know when we're in the next house but one?" They decided they would have to go out into the box room and walk across it, taking steps as long as the steps from one rafter to the next. That would give them an idea of how many rafters went to a room. Then they would allow about 4 more for the passage between the 2 attics in Polly's house, and then the same number for the maid's bedroom as for the box room. That would give them the length of the house. When they had done that distance twice, they would be at the end of Diggory's house. Any door they came to after that would let them into an attic of the empty house. Now, are you picturing this? I'll try and find a picture to show you for next time, because row houses are a little different. I guess you'd think of apartments, but they were owned by the people, like a townhouse. For some of you, that might mean something. For some of you, it might not. "But I don't expect it's really empty at all," said Diggory, talking about the empty house. "What do you expect?" "I expect someone lives there in secret, only coming in and out at night with a dark lantern. We shall probably discover a gang of desperate criminals and get a reward. It's all rot to say a house would be empty all those years, unless there was some mystery." "Daddy thought it might be the drains," said Polly. "Pooh! Grown-ups are always thinking of uninteresting explanations," said Diggory. Now that they were talking by daylight in the attic instead of by candlelight in the smuggler's cave, it seemed much less likely that the empty house would be haunted. Now I'm going to stop right there, and I want you to think about a couple things. As we keep reading, I want you to make a list of words that you don't know what they are, and then we'll talk about them in one of our Zoom classes. I want you to maybe keep a list of characters and setting, because it's going to take us a while to get through all of these. So we want to make sure that we're staying in the story. And I will find a picture of row houses to show you so that you can picture how it would even be possible for the attic to go from house to house. Hope you enjoyed our first part of Chapter 1, and I look forward to reading to you some more. This is going to be fun. Love you guys. Bye. Bye.